Oh. Okay. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the June 6th, 2022 monthly work session for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission. My name is Kiva Samuel and I serve as chair of the Planning Commission, and we'll go through some hybrid meeting protocols. Today's meeting is being streamed online in accordance with the state's electronic meeting statute. Requirements of notice, access, and minutes are being met through electronic means. The public and media can watch this meeting live on the Planning, Design, and Development Department's YouTube page. Participants are muted to minimize interruptions. Please do not unmute unless you are speaking. To make a motion, please state your name before making a first or second. And we are still operating under the virtual meeting protocol for the state. So we will take all votes via roll call, including a very public election vote that normally would be private. So everyone should just take note and be prepared for that. We will begin now with introductions, starting with our commissioners that are in the room, please.
John Hamm, Planning Commission.
Will Russell, Planning Commission.
Aaron Harvey, Planning Commission.
And now with our commissioners on our Zoom. Mr. Vice Chair.
Sam
Vice
Spencer.
Chair, Philip Gusman, Planning Commission.
Sam Spencer, Planning Commission.
Andrew Blumenthal, Planning Commission.
Douglas Welton, Planning Commission.
Elizabeth
Courtney
McMillan,
Rhodes, Planning Commission.
Elizabeth McMillan, Planning Commission.
Courtney Rhodes, Planning Commission.
Melissa Gaston, Planning Commission.
Hey, Kelly, Planning Commission.
And I believe we are missing Commissioner Harvey. Again, I'm Kiva Samuel, Planning Commission, and we'll begin with staff here in the room with us, starting from my left and we'll go around.
Okay.
We're ready.
Alan Goodwin, Planning Staff.
Allison Craig, Interim Planning Director. Candace Rory, Planning Staff.
Siobhan Davis, Planning Staff. Laura Harmon, Planning Staff.
Yolanda Jones, Planning Staff.
And with our planning staff that are joining us via Zoom.
Tim Porter, Chief Urban Forester, Planning Staff.
Sandra Montgomery, Planning Staff.
Kathy Cornett, Planning Staff.
And I believe we have our historic district representative.
Krista Lineberger, Historic District Commission.
Mr. Jones.
Sorry, Bruce Jones with Charlotte Area Transit.
Okay. Thank you so very much. Did I miss anybody? Did we omit anyone? Oh, we do have one of our planning staff members here pretending to be a spectator.
Kevin May, Planning Staff.
Thank you, Kevin. Did I miss anyone now? Is everyone accounted for? Okay, thank you so very much. And we will jump into our agenda now, beginning with our meeting minutes from last month. Are there any questions, comments, discussion? on the agenda packet.
This is Commissioner Welton. I will make a motion that we approve the minutes as they were presented.
This is Commissioner Barbie. I second.
Motion by Walton, second by Barbie. Commissioner Ham,
Aye.
Commissioner Russell,
Aye.
Commissioner Barbie,
Aye.
Commissioner Gusman,
Aye.
Kelly,
Aye.
McMillan,
Aye.
Gaston,
Aye.
Blumenthal. Blumenthal,
Sorry, did you not hear me the first time? Aye.
thank you. Rhodes,
Aye.
Spencer,
Abstain because I was absent.
thank you very much. The minutes pass. At our last full body meeting, at our May work session, the nominating committee presented two names recommended for leadership for the 2022-23 fiscal year. I feel funny saying this about myself, but the nominating committee presented their slate of recommended candidates for chair and vice chair. For chair of the commission, the nominating committee recommended Kiba Samuel, and for vice chair of the planning commission, the nominating committee selected Philip Gusman. It is now about that time that we open nominations from the floor, as Commissioner Gusman and I accepted those nominations at our May monthly meeting. So I will make the request now for a motion from the floor for your chair of the planning commission. Should there be any further nominations, please speak now.
If there are no further nominations.
Ma'am, Madam Chair, ask for nominations 2 more times, please.
Yep. Going once, nominations for chair of the commission going twice.
Madam Chair, I move to close the floor for nominations.
Motion by Commissioner Spencer to close the chair, close the
Blumenthal.
nominations for chair of the planning commission. And I believe Mr. Blumenthal made a
Second, correct.
second to that motion. Thank you so very much. Roll call vote, Commissioner Ham,
Aye.
Russell,
Aye.
Barbie,
Aye.
Gusman,
Aye.
Kelly,
Aye.
McMillan,
Aye.
Gaston,
Aye.
Welton,
Aye.
Blumenthal,
Aye.
Rhodes,
Aye.
Spencer,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye.
Madam
The floor nominations are now closed for chair.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Spencer,
I move that we elect the sole nominee, Kiba Samuel, to another term as chair by acclamation.
It's Welton. I'll second.
motion by Commissioner Spencer that election happened by acclamation. I believe that was Commissioner Walton with the second. And we will, is there any discussion, debate, comment? Hearing none, Commissioner Ham,
Aye.
Russell,
Aye.
Barbie,
Aye.
Gusman,
Aye.
Kelly,
Aye.
McMillan,
Aye.
Gaston,
Aye.
Welton,
Aye.
Blumenthal,
Aye.
Rhodes,
Aye.
Spencer.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Kiba Samuel has been reelected as Chair of the Planning Commission for the 2022-23 fiscal year. I will reserve further comment for after we complete the second nomination for Vice Chair now. Again, the nominating committee selected Philip Gusman to repeat his term as Vice Chair of the Planning Commission for the fiscal year 2022-23. And are there any nominations at this time from the floor for Vice Chair of the Planning Commission for fiscal year 22-23? Going once and now going twice. Are there any nominations from the floor for the role of Vice Chair of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission for fiscal year 2022-23? Please speak now. Any nominations for Vice Chair 22-23? Hearing none, do I have a motion to close nominations?
Motion to close the nominations, Commissioner Ham.
This is Commissioner Welton. I'll second that motion.
Motion by Ham to close nominations for Vice Chair, second by Walton. Any debate, discussion? Hearing none, Commissioner Ham,
Aye.
Russell,
Aye.
Barbie,
Aye.
Gusman,
Aye.
Kelly,
Aye.
McMillan,
Aye.
Gaston,
Aye.
Walton,
Aye.
Blumenthal,
Aye.
Rhodes,
Aye.
Spencer,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. That is recorded as two unanimous votes for your leadership roles for the 2022-23 fiscal year. Mr. Repeat Vice Chair, any comments?
Did we just close nominations or did we vote?
I'm sorry.
Roll, sorry.
Was that?
Did
The
I?
close?
I think we
Madam
closed
Chair.
nominations.
I would like to ask our third member of the nominating committee, Elizabeth McMillan, for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we nominate and elect Vice Chair Gusman to Philip Gusman to the Vice Chair role of the Planning Commission.
We have a motion by Commissioner.
second.
We have a motion by Commissioner McMillan to elect Philip Gusman as Vice Chair of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission for the fiscal year 22-23. And I had a second by Commissioner Rhodes, I believe.
Yes.
Thank you. Any debate, discussion? Hearing none, Commissioner Ham,
Aye.
Barbie,
Aye.
Russell,
Aye.
Gusman,
Aye.
Kelly,
Aye.
McMillan,
Aye.
Gaston,
Aye.
Welton,
Aye.
Blumenthal,
Aye.
Rhodes,
Aye.
Spencer.
Aye.
And now I would like to introduce the 2022-23 Vice Chair of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission, Mr. Philip Gusman. An opportunity to speak, please.
Thank you. Procedure isn't always my strong suit, but I'm glad I can back you up whenever needed. Thank you all. And I mean, the work has to be done. We know what we've got ahead of us. It's not going to be easy. And I'm really looking forward to, first of all, I'm honored. And I'm really looking forward to working with everyone here to get us across a finish line of creating the first UDO in Charlotte's history, really. And I'll be short in the interest of brevity. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gusman. Commissioner Rhodes, I think I saw a hand raised. Was that by mistake? Oh,
That was an applause.
oh, got it. So sorry.
Virtual applause.
I'll notate that for my non-seeing eyeglasses. Thank you so very much. I'll take a quick minute to express my deep gratitude for your trust in my leadership, Philip's leadership. I look forward to continuing to partner with each and every one of you in the 22-23 fiscal year to see what more we can accomplish. This work year was a little bit different. The pandemic has turned us a little upside down, and I look forward to getting back to a normal, what we know to be more of a normal operating procedure for the Planning Commission, where we're in the room, exchanging ideas and really working in a more collaborative manner. Thank you. I look forward to the opportunity again to partner with you to accomplish a lot in the 22-23 fiscal year. 22 was a little bit light. Yes, we have this 685-page document. That was just a drop in the bucket. But it was a heavy lift. The campaigning continues. The work isn't done yet. So the next few months will be very critical and very busy. I thank you for the time that you took to really explore your options in terms of leadership. And thank you again for your trust. Let's begin the business of the day. Up first, we have Alan, and he's going to take us through the latest UDO update. We also have Laura here in the room for those who are wondering or may have forgotten that she's in the room. She's been a little bit quiet today, but she's with us. She's back with us. We're glad to have her back. Glad to have Alan back with us. Alan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, Laura is going to kick off our slides, and then she will turn it over to Yolanda, and then I will jump in.
Thank you. So we are really pleased to have the second draft released. That was released, if we go to the next slide, on Friday for review. It is a red line, though I don't think all the lines are red, but a marked up version so that you can see the changes made from the first draft to the second draft. And this is also the public hearing draft. So it is the draft that we are required by law to put out 4 weeks at least in advance of the public hearing. And so that's what we have before you. Today, we want to talk a bit about the review and adoption timeline, some key dates, the public input process and schedule, and key changes from the first draft to the second draft. So you'll know some of the big things to look for in the document. Again, on the bottom, you can see June 3rd is when we release the draft. We will be accepting comments through the comment portal through the end of June. July 11th will be the public hearing, and we say the public hearing with City Council, but that will also be the public hearing with the Planning Committee of the Planning Commission as well. On the 19th of July, we'll be coming to the Planning Committee of the Planning Commission for a recommendation, and we will ask for a council decision on August 22nd. So we're just a little bit over 2 months from asking for council on a decision after a number of years of work on this. And we're looking forward to working with the Planning Commission and the Planning Committee in particular as we move forward with this. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Yolanda Jones, who will be taking us through the engagement process.
Thank you, Laura. So this is where we're back to ask for your help in making sure that people remain engaged with this second draft of the UDO. I'll quickly run through this slide and then we're going to look at that timeline again. We did open the public input portal for comments on Friday, on the same day that the draft released. And then we will have several public engagement efforts, and I'll speak to those in the next slide. But I did want to point out that with those public input comments that we will receive, we're going to summarize those to provide to both City Council and the Planning Commission / Planning Committee. And we will, again, pull that into some sort of summary for you all as we receive those. If you'll go to the next slide, I can speak to. Awesome, thank you. So this is just a kind of a more zoomed in version of that slide that Laura just showed you, which is kind of our totality of our timeline. These are our public engagement efforts. We will share this with you as well. If you see in the bottom corner, there is a QR code that can be scanned that will take you directly to where you can register for these events. We will be hosting kind of 3 buckets of public engagement events. The first of those, which is a virtual update session, that will be similar to our community conversations we had in our first phase. We will host 2 of those on June 14th and then June 16th. We will have those just as we did those community conversations twice a day. So you'll be able to register for the 12 to 1 o'clock timeframe as well as the 6 to 7 on both of those days. And on June 15th, we will have our in-person opportunity, which is similar to our open houses that we had in the fall. During these times, actually, we'll have this at CMGC from 2:30 to 6:30. And during that time, you'll be able to speak to subject matter experts at a table. What we are happy to be able to say that we're going to be able to provide is we will validate parking and provide a limited number of transit passes for folks to be able to get to CMGC. We know it's not always the most accessible place to get to, but we want as many people as could possibly attend. We want to see your faces and hear your questions and your feedback on the second draft. So, sorry, one more. No worries, one last thing. No worries. So the very last thing is we will host virtual office hours. This is just a way for folks to be able to tap into that one-on-one conversation with subject matter experts. Again, if you go to the QR code or to charlotteudo.org, which is where that QR code will send you, you're able to actually schedule time. We did these in 15-minute blocks where you can speak to specific topics within the UDO, and you'll have that one-on-one time to be able to ask your questions and get answers with subject matter experts during that time. And as you can see, we host those on June 21st, 22nd, 23rd, and 28th. And again, this is all ways in which you can get questions answered that you may have about the draft. And then finally, the public comment portal will close on June 30th. So again, as you're providing your comments, remember that date, June 30th, and all of these ways in which you can engage with us. If you have additional questions, you can reach out to any of us. If we can provide you as commissioners anything to help share, please let us know. We will obviously be posting via social. We ask for your help in sharing that across your social platforms as well. As many people as we could possibly get involved, that's our goal.
So if we could pause just for a second, Laura, right here, if you don't mind, about timeline, because I know there's some questions here. The most important of note is that typically the end of the fiscal year is when we kind of make moves on planning and zoning committees. That is likely still the plan, that is still being solidified at this point. We know a little bit about what that looks like, but not exactly. And commissioners, please be aware that you'll probably have an email at some point this week with those assignments for the next fiscal year. So that is of note, particularly in the Q&A, in the virtual updates, which are, I believe, the first pieces of your public engagement. The last round of these that we did, there was some feedback received that folks were somewhat disappointed that there wasn't more of a Q&A type format. And sometimes questions don't come to people until they're looking at something like what you may present in a virtual update. As we're advertising for the public engagement sessions, particularly the Q&A, the virtual updates, is it possible that we include a note about offering their questions in advance? If there's not going to be an opportunity for Q&A, if we could make some if we could add some clarity there, that would probably eliminate some of the misunderstanding. Virtual update for me, I know that what that means, but for others, I don't want people to get there and think, oh, I can ask questions since I'm looking at it, and there not be an opportunity to ask those questions. So if we could just add some clarity, that would be my only request there. And then finally, it looks like planning department does not have time off in June. So good luck, but we'll definitely be partners in spreading the wealth in terms of this information. I think Commissioner Ham also had a question, and I see Commissioner Gusman's hand is up as well.
I just have a quick question on the June 15th event. Have we identified where the open house will be held in the building?
Yes, it's at the Government Center, CMGC, so it'll be here in the
Here.
rotunda. I'm sorry, yeah, as soon as you walk into the building in the rotunda.
All right.
I apologize. So, just quickly, if you don't mind, Commissioner Sam, sorry, Chairperson Samuel, we do have a block when you sign up for the virtual conversation that asks you for questions.
Awesome. Awesome.
So when you go to that link, they're there.
Awesome. Commissioner Gusman.
Yes, Kiva's question and answered. Good job. Thank you, guys. I think that's a key element to this because a lot of people did exactly what Kiva said. My other question is we need to make sure this gets out to all the commissioners. And I want to encourage all the commissioners that this needs to be what you talk about with your communities for the next 3 weeks. This is it. We're getting near the finish line. We want to hear from the community on all of these topics. This is getting down to the last opportunity to have a real impact. And it is time to hear from anyone who thinks they haven't been heard from. And that's my point. So if we can get a copy of this and just, even if it's just a cleaned up PDF or something that we can easily spread, share on social media, etc. My apologies.
Thank you, Commissioner Gusman. We will have that to you before the end of this meeting. So thank you very much. We are definitely at your mercy to share this as far and wide as possible. So thank you.
Yeah, I just would like to add, we'd like to also hear from those people who feel like they have been heard from and like changes so that we're really getting a broad input. Not that we've made everyone happy with our changes, but it would be good to know kind of where are we falling as far as, do you like it? Do you not like it? Feel like you've been heard, you haven't been heard.
Thank you. We released the first draft of the UDO in October of last year and had a lengthy public comment and engagement process. We received over 1,200 comments from community members and stakeholders, which we have addressed individually and answered. We have received feedback and questions and comments from our city council members as well as from this planning commission. We have also received comments and feedback from our UDO advisory commission, as well as over 600 comments from other staff, city and county staff who will be users of the UDO. The feedback that we've received has been diverse. We have taken all of it into account in the recommended changes for the second draft of the UDO. Next slide, please. So what you'll see if you look at the second draft is a marked up version, a red line version of the first draft, so that you'll be able to see all of the changes that have been made. Things that have been deleted from the first draft to the second draft will show in red text with a strike through. New text or material that has been added will show up in blue. And you'll see the same thing whether you look at this online at the charlotteudo.org website or whether you look at it in a hard copy at the library or wherever you may have a hard copy. So we may not have included minor changes like little typo. We may have just corrected those without showing those as a red line version. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over what some of the key areas that have been updated are from the first draft to the second. Not going to cover every single change in the UDO. That would just take us too long. But I am going to cover, or we will cover all of these bulleted points that you see on your screen. So we've got a lot of material to cover. But I also want to mention that we have prepared a document. It's an 11-page document that goes over the key updated areas. It's available at the charlotteudo.org website. So if you, it basically has the same material that we're going to be covering in these slides today. So we'll just dig right into it, starting with our next slide, which is the new campus zoning district. So we have added a new district since the first draft. It's a research campus district. It will be in with the 3 other campus districts that we've included in the first draft. And this is intended to accommodate large-scale research campuses within a mixed-use environment, typically characterized by taller structures, perhaps in a pedestrian-oriented environment. Next slide. The sidewall height restriction is something that generated a lot of discussion in the first draft. And the purpose, what this does is it is for infill or new development in residential neighborhoods, typically neighborhood 1 residential neighborhoods. And the intention is to make sure that new development or infill development fits with the character of the surrounding neighborhoods. And we do that by putting a maximum sidewall height on this new development that is either the maximum sidewall height or the average of the sidewall height of the buildings on either side of this new development. In the first draft, that maximum sidewall height was 12 feet. And through the review and comment process, it was pointed out that this would really limit the ability of to develop duplexes or triplexes particularly on smaller lots, because you just wouldn't be able to do that with a 12-foot sidewall height, which basically limits buildings to single stories. So we have increased that minimum sidewall height from 12 feet to 20 feet in the second draft of the UDO, and it would apply for neighborhood 1 zoning districts. It would also be changed in the residential infill overlay district. That change also goes from 12 feet to 20 feet. There is still the possibility of doing taller if the surrounding buildings are taller, but this is a minimum. So it increases 12 feet to 20 feet. That can be found in Article 4.3 for the neighborhood 1 zoning districts. Next. This is something new also. It's called the Street Side Historic District, and it's a new concept for Charlotte, although it's been used elsewhere. And it creates a historic district that would only apply to the first 50% of the buildings and properties in the historic district, or the first 50% that face a street, so that it essentially tries to establish, maintain the character of the district while also allowing changes to the rear of buildings that would not be subject to historic district standards. So this was again, a new concept for Charlotte, but has been used successfully in other communities. Next. We've adjusted the height transition for new development when it is adjacent to residential uses in the neighborhood 1 place types. And it may be a little hard to see these graphics on this slide, but the top slide is the original height transition graphic, which allowed for building heights up to 65 feet within 100 feet of the lot line of that neighborhood 1 place type. And then after the 100-foot distance, the development would be allowed to go to whatever height would be allowed by the zoning district of the new development. I'm sorry, that was for the first 200 feet, 65 feet in height for the first 200 feet in distance. And then the building height would be able to go up to the allowable height of the zoning district. The revision that we're proposing, which is shown in the second graphic, is that for the first 100 feet, the building height of the new development would be capped at 50 feet. And then after 100 feet, it would be able to go up to 65 feet. And then after a total of 200 feet from the neighborhood 1 place type, it would go to the allowable height of the zoning district. So the effect of this is that it lowers that building height as it is closest to the neighborhood 1 residential use. Next slide. We've also revised some of the maximum building heights in a few districts, mostly in our centers districts. I won't go into all of them, but they can be found in the UDO under the article that covers those particular districts. If we've changed the height, you'll be able to see in the marked up version the old height, which will be crossed out, and then you'll be able to see what the new height is. We've also increased some of the maximum heights in our bonus options. These height increases range from a minor, like something like 5 feet, to as much as 50 feet in some of our districts. We have also reduced the minimum building height in our neighborhood center district from 24 feet down to 16 feet to reflect the lesser intensity of that center district. And just to note that all building heights, maximums and minimums where they apply are found in a table in each of the individual zoning district articles. Next slide. This has generated more comment than any other issue in the first draft of the UDO, and that is short-term rental regulations or Airbnbs, Verbos, what have you. And we did receive a lot of comments, both pro and against regulating short-term rentals. However, given that there is an ongoing lawsuit in Wilmington that may give us direction for the time being, the city attorney's office has advised that we pull the proposed short-term rental regulations from the UDO pending clearer guidance based on that lawsuit. So for the time being, at least, we will not introduce any new regulations on short-term rentals, but may do so in the future according to whatever our legal counsel advises. Next. We have a bonus menu, which we have in our current draft, and we also use it in our, I should say we have it in the first draft of the UDO, but we also have been using it for 2 or 3 years now in our transit-oriented development districts. And this allows for either increased building height or in some cases, reduced open space requirements or additional building length based on earning bonus points by providing some form of community benefit, such as affordable housing. We, in the second draft of the UDO, have expanded the options available to earn bonus points, and they include additional EV charging or affordable housing for a lower percentage of AMI, area median income, for multimodal transportation mitigation, and also for transportation demand management mitigation. So there are some new ways for development to earn bonus points in the second draft of the UDO. And I want to point out also that the options that we have made available also provide a community benefit, and they advance some of our adopted city policies, such as our strategic energy action plan and the strategic mobility plan. Next slide. The second draft of the UDO provides incentives for the development of affordable housing, and we have tried to clarify these and expand them. They include the ability to utilize standards of a different zoning category or adjustments to the requirement to build streets under certain conditions, reimbursement for sidewalks on public streets, and alternative standards for green area and heritage trees if affordable housing is provided as part of the development. Next slide. In response to some suggestions and feedback, The second draft will offer some options for green space, such as the option to dedicate land to Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation, or to provide a fee in lieu of providing on-site open space. We have worked with the county park and rec staff to develop these options, and we think this will allow greater flexibility for development in ways that they can provide or contribute to the provision of open space. Next. We also have clarified how and when required open space areas may overlap. So it is possible in some cases to count the same area of land in one or more required open area requirements, such as open space, landscape yards, tree saves, amenitized tree areas. I won't read the whole list, but you can see them there. And in some cases, some of these areas may overlap, provided that that the development meets the intent and standards of each type of those things, so that perhaps the open space could overlap with the tree save, as long as the requirements, both the open space requirements and the tree safe requirements, are being met. This gives us a little more flexibility and could perhaps open up a little bit more of the site for development opportunities. Next slide. We have also modified some of the building design standards, which are generally found in each of the individual zoning district articles, sometimes as a footnote, but based on some feedback that we received, we've made some of these changes, and I'll just quickly go over them. There was a requirement that the vehicle entrances to garages be located to the rear of the building for multifamily development. We have deleted that from the second draft. The first draft had a maximum number of units that a townhome development or a multifamily attached development could have. We've eliminated the maximum number of units and replaced it with a maximum building length. Instead, recognizing that not all units are the same size, and so instead we've done a building length. The requirement for facade modulation was removed for non-residential development. And for multifamily stacked, we've reduced the facade modulation requirement. The building base and entrance design standard for the first two floors on taller buildings to distinguish from the remainder of the building, we've deleted that standard, and we've modified the prominent entrance design standard. Next slide. Another area that's generated a lot of conversation is our new requirement in the UDO, proposed requirement for electric vehicle charging stations for certain types of developments if parking is provided over a certain number of parking spaces. The EV parking requirement would not apply to all development. It would apply to multifamily stacked, also to hotels, the residential component of mixed-use development, as well as parking lots and parking garages if they are as a principal use. We believe that we should maintain some sort of EV charging requirement in the UDO, given that the anticipated demand for electric vehicles seems to be growing, and what we see coming, and also in keeping with the recommendations of our adopted plan. However, we have eliminated from the first draft the requirement to provide any EV ready parking, but we are still requiring or proposing to require EV capable and EV installed charging requirements if the parking is provided over a certain number of spaces. And we have modified the definition of EV capable to only require the reservation of space in the electrical room for future EV chargers, and a continuous raceway to the future EV parking space, rather than actually providing the circuits in the panel. So we think this will keep the costs lower for providing the EV capable. And also wanted to mention that Duke Energy has a program that can help defer the cost of the installation of EV charging that's available. Next slide. A couple of slides on parking. We've had a lot of conversation and feedback about parking, from maintaining our current parking standards all the way to eliminating any minimum parking requirements at all. For the second draft, we have kept the basic three-tier structure that was proposed in the first draft, but we've tried to simplify the parking table a little bit by consolidating uses that have similar parking standards into one bucket. For example, anything that's in a commercial use that has the same standard rather than being listed individually by use, we will just show them as commercial use. But given that there are some commercial uses with unique parking standards based on whatever they are, we still will have some uses listed below the general commercial use that will show you the those unique parking standards. We have generally reduced the parking minimums in our tier 2 parking requirements. So you'll be able to see what those reductions are in the red line version or in the revisions. And for the minimum parking requirement, where we have certain uses that are adjacent to neighborhood 1 place type, the first draft had a requirement that if you were within 200 feet of those areas with your development, you would have a minimum parking requirement for uses such as restaurants and nightclubs. We propose increasing that 200-foot separation distance to 400 feet. And this helps to address some of the challenges that have been raised by those existing neighborhoods. Next slide. We have not made any changes to the tier 1 parking maximums because of concerns over parking spillover into suburban residential neighborhoods, but we'll continue to evaluate those parking minimums and see how they work. And we will consider future changes once we have done some further analysis on that. We also have added a significant change to any development that is within a half-mile walk of an existing transit station, regardless of whatever parking tier that development may fall into. They can use the tier 3 parking standards, even if that zoning is not a tier 3 zoning district. Again, as long as the development is within a half-mile walk of an existing transit station. And that's to recognize that there is some benefit to being in proximity to the transit station, even if you don't have a tier 3 zoning district, such as a TOD district. At this point, I would like to turn it over for the next 2 or 3 slides to our Chief Urban Forester, Tim Porter. Tim?
Thank you, Alan, and good afternoon, everyone. We want to touch on a couple important changes for tree regulations, one of those being a relocation of tree protection standards, combining tree planting preservation requirements into the landscaping screening article. That will be Article 20. One motivation to do this is to provide a more streamlined approach, or customer service oriented approach, but also to group tree planting and preservation requirements together with the vegetation related zoning requirements in the traditional landscaping screening realm. The tree ordinance is part of the zoning ordinance, and so this makes a lot of sense to combine them together. The standalone tree ordinance will remain, so that's currently Chapter 21 of the City Code, so shifting the number to Article 20 should hopefully help with any potential confusion. It did not make sense to have a landscape screening and tree protection Article 21 with a standalone tree ordinance of 21. The standalone tree ordinance will cease to have any development requirements in it. It will have very basic operational related requirements. All the current development regulations in the tree ordinance will shift into the UDO. Next slide, please. Heritage trees has been the most important and prominent regulatory concept in the UDO. So I want to touch base on some changes we're making in the second draft related to that. Two key changes. I'm not going to read this entire slide, but two key changes were to provide more flexibility for the two applicability areas for this requirement. There's a land development and a non-land development applicability of this requirement. We're pivoting from a very strong preservation intent and purpose with heritage trees to a moderate preservation and emphasizing tracking and mitigation as the primary intents. So there's more flexibility for development customers to remove heritage trees. They must demonstrate a conflict on the site. So all allowances the development a developer has for a certain property, they'll be able to build to that level. And heritage trees may be removed if a conflict is demonstrated, and that can range from another type of ordinance requirement or something as simple as the articulation of sidewalks and internal roads. If there's no other reasonable way to articulate that and place roads that require the removal of a heritage tree, that has to be demonstrated in the plans. Staff will review and approve with a mitigation requirement. The mitigation requirement focuses on a mitigation fee as one component and the replanting of one tree. Those mitigation fees will support soon to be developed new programs under the Canopy Care initiative that will provide support for the maintenance of large mature trees on private property, particularly in low-income areas, and the planting of trees on private property. The land development component of the heritage tree regulation will be within the UDO. The non-land development component, since it's not a development requirement, will live in the standalone tree ordinance. So to be clear, that's a development requirement. Well, excuse me, that is not a development requirement, and it applies to private property. Again, heritage trees are defined as native North Carolina tree species, 30 inches and greater at chest level. There's a specific height measurement there. So the heritage tree regulation for non-land development scenarios has also been relaxed, again, pivoting from a very strong preservation approach to a very low preservation approach with an emphasis on tracking and mitigation. This approach will give us an opportunity to better understand on a granular level over the next few years how heritage tree preservation really impacts property owners, and also to better understand how heritage trees contribute to the tree canopy on a granular level and a citywide scale. Initial study by UNCC in one neighborhood, Revolution Park, indicated that heritage trees account for only 30% approximately of the tree population in that neighborhood, but make or account for 60+% of all the tree canopy benefits provided. So we want a better understanding going forward if that is a one-off situation. Is it a citywide thing? Does it apply differently based on the age of a neighborhood, the structure, the character, et cetera? We obtained a lot of feedback on this. Particularly important of note is the economic impact analysis that indicated that the initial very strong preservation approach would significantly restrict property use and development opportunity. So this is the right balance. We think we changed from the first draft to the second draft, and we think this balance provides more flexibility and predictability for customers in both the land development and non-land development areas. Next slide, please. So moving left to right for land development, to the land development heritage tree regulation. On the left is what we have now. There's a preservation requirement for champion trees. We do have a heritage tree regulation on the books now, but it really only applies to state champion level trees, which we do not see. We estimate there's less than one per year. So it really is not having much of an effect at all. In the first draft, we recommended a very strong preservation approach with a high threshold to meet to obtain permission to remove a tree. The second cell down there in the middle column explains the mitigation requirements. There was no incentive for preservation. And in all cases, both in the first draft and the second draft, any dead, diseased, dying, or hazardous trees can be removed without a permit and do not require mitigation. In the second draft, we are proposing removal allowed where there's a demonstrated conflict on a site. Sites can develop to their full allowable level with a stronger mitigation requirement of $1,500 per tree and one tree planted. That $1,500 fee could be reduced or eliminated for additional mitigation trees. We've added incentives. So if a site preserves specimen trees, which are that next tier down, still large trees, but not quite to that heritage tree size, the preservation of those trees will waive a mitigation requirement, and preservation of heritage trees will provide a development customer double credit or 2 times the credit to meet their green area, currently known as tree save requirement. I do see a hand up. I'm not sure if we're taking questions, but I'm happy to, if that's allowed right now.
So before we take questions, Tim, was that the end of your presentation?
I think we have one more slide.
We have 3 more slides.
Okay, 3 more slides. Thank you. Let's jump to that.
That was the last tree slide, but we have 3 more.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, since we're so close to the end, I'd rather get through this presentation and circle back to questions.
That sounds great.
Next slide.
Let me pass it back
Okay.
off. Thank you
Thanks,
for the
Tim.
opportunity. Yep.
Thank you, Tim. I'll jump back in now. Just getting back to some of the other key changes in the UDO. We've just got 3 more slides left. We have increased the maximum block length in our manufacturing and logistics place types from 1,000 feet to 2,000 feet, recognizing that there are uses such as, well, for example, the Amazon Fulfillment Center you see here, or some other uses, warehousing uses that typically want longer buildings. So we have made that, actually the first draft was 1,500 feet, not 2,000, not 1,000. So we've increased it by 500 feet and also added an option to provide additional flexibility for development if it can be demonstrated that that is necessary for the type of economic development activity that would go on there. Next slide. We have added some street classifications for the uptown area, 4 new street types: the Uptown Signature Street, Linear Park, Uptown Primary Street, and Uptown Secondary Street. And they are mapped on the Charlotte Streets map. And we've done that to just have greater flexibility in our uptown area for what our streetscapes should be in the uptown. And next slide. Finally, we have added non-conforming site elements and some clarification to our UDO to allow for non-conforming elements such as landscaping, fences or walls, or parking and loading that exist today to continue to exist without having to be modified. However, if there is new construction, then any non-conforming site elements would need to be brought into compliance with the new UDO requirements. So that was a clarification on some of those non-conforming elements. And I believe, Madam Chair, that was our last slide.
Okay, thank you, Alan, Laura, Yolanda, and Tim. Before we begin with questions from our planning commissioners, there's 2 things that I'd like to note. The first one is that on the timeline that Laura reviewed at the top of the presentation did not include the upcoming ordinance advisory committee meeting. Laura, can you clarify that that is on tomorrow at 11:30 a.m.? I think that some of this information would be reviewed in that meeting, which is a little bit longer than our presentation. So because we have CATS right behind the UDO presentation, and because I know today won't be the end of our questions, right? We sometimes are viewed as having first dibs at staff since we've been a partner on this document for the past 6 years. And some of our access is a little bit more elevated than those of the normal public. So because of that privilege that we might enjoy with staff, if you don't have any urgent, absolutely clarifying questions, if we could maybe reserve them to tomorrow's OAC meeting, which is more of a Q&A. Kevin does a pretty good job moderating, and Alan and Laura and partnering in those types of meetings. And they're very good at answering questions as presentation kind of goes along. That particular format is more fitting of a more interactive. Here, though, we have some questions, some hands raised. So I do want to recognize Commissioner Kelly as one that I saw. I believe, I don't know if there were others. And I will also just prepare staff for a list of questions that I would have. I just noticed that as we were reviewing the bonus criteria, some of the elements in the first draft that were really finite are more ambiguous now. So just getting some clarity there. The heritage tree, also the second note, I'm sorry, I started off saying that there was 2 notes. One is about the OAC meeting. The second one is there is a glossary in our UDO binder. So if you guys, as you were listening to this presentation, if you were not sure of what a particular term or definition is, please refer to that glossary. I think it's in section 2 of the UDO. So if you want to know exactly how the UDO defines a heritage tree, please refer to that glossary. If you want to know specifically how the UDO defines the champion trees and some of the other terms that we heard today, please review the glossary of terms. And I will recognize Commissioner Kelly at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, overall comment, thank you for the presentation, everyone. And I particularly like the additional document that's on the website that summarizes the changes similar to what we just reviewed. My only quick comment is to Tim's presentation on the trees that we focus on the replacement trees and the type, because one of the reasons that the stats would show that in that neighborhood, a small number of trees have the biggest benefit is because they're big trees. And if we continue to let people plant small trees, we're never going to get the benefit that people assume we get by placing a tree. So I just point out that it seems pretty obvious that if you replace a 50-foot tree with a 10-foot tree, that's not going to give you the same coverage.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I appreciate that comment. We are focusing on a replacement strategy that has large mature species to replace any heritage tree that's removed. It's an ongoing battle to ensure we get more than just the flowering, pretty trees that are small, but that is a primary focus of this requirement and any additional supportive assistance program for planting that may come online in addition to the requirement. So I appreciate that thought.
And I believe Commissioner McMillan also had a hand raised.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
My questions was focused on the EV charging stations, and I think I just need to go back and look. I think it was mentioned that it was. I think I need to study it a little bit better, and maybe I can get a little bit more detail in the OAC tomorrow. So I'll lower my hand. But thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McMillan. I think I said the same thing about some of affordable housing elements that kind of change in the bonus criteria, heritage tree changes. I know that's been much discussed in TAP committee and in council special called meetings. So just reviewing some of those. Parking has been a hot topic as well. So thank you for bringing that to the commission, and look forward to you guys sending questions to staff. Don't wait to the planning committee's recommendation meeting. Don't wait until public hearing. Go ahead and start sending those questions, whether it be to staff members or through the UDO's website ASAP. I know staff is looking forward. And thank you, Team UDO. And I want to recognize Mariah, I think has joined us. I don't think she was on the call with us first. Commissioners Walton and Gusman have their hands raised. I'll recognize Commissioner Walton first.
And I will just, tomorrow on the OAC meeting, Alan, I will ask you about alternate technologies involved with EVs, because you showed a picture of 2010 technology there, and I was wondering what's going to happen when 2030 technology hits. So talk to you tomorrow.
I will acknowledge for Kevin that he's giggling a little bit. So Commissioner Gusman.
Yes, and I'll have more tomorrow and going forward. I do want to highlight to everybody, if you haven't spent any time with the UDO Red Line yet, please, I had the luxury of having COVID over the weekend, so I had a lot of time to read it, but I'm not done with it. But I do want to give kudos, since Laura did mention on a few issues that while I'm not perfectly happy with, I do got to say the compromises look definitely in line, and that's EV, the height adjacent to R1, pardon me, residential place type, N1 neighborhood, the sidewall height, and honestly, the parking even. I'm pretty happy with those compromises, and good job, staff, for working at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gusman. And as you and I kind of switched roles in terms of where we chair, I just want to point out to those who will be on the planning committee, become well-versed in the changes. Staff has spent a lot of time summarizing those in that 11-page document. So if you don't have the luxury of having COVID to be able to look through the 685 pages, I encourage you to please get very familiar with the 11-page summary prior to the recommendation meeting and prior to this coming June 21st, no, 22nd meeting.
21st, right?
This June meeting. Please become very familiar with that document. You will be charged with knowing what's in there, and you will be called upon. We need input, and this is the time to do it. And I appreciate in advance you guys taking the time to do that. If there is nothing else for the UDO, Mr. Jones. Welcome.
Hi, good.
Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my screen with you. Can you see and hear everything okay?
We can, thank you.
Perfect. So my name is Bruce Jones, and I'm with Charlotte Area Transit. So today I just wanted to give you all a brief update on some of the recommendations that have come from our bus system redesign known as Avenger My Ride. So we recently presented this to our governing board, the Metropolitan Transit Commission, to get adopted. So I wanted to walk through you all the recommendations and just let you know what that means for the region as we move forward. Sorry, let me get my technology together. There we go. So just to start, so this effort ties in closely with the number of initiatives that we're working on at CATS, and then also other city departments are working on. So this is all a connected vision that we're working to achieve. And so we're working, of course, closely with the Charlotte 2040 plan to identify how we can continue to support some of the growth metrics that are identified in that comp plan, including the 10-minute neighborhood concept. We're also working closely with the strategic mobility plan, especially as we move towards identifying how we can have that mode shift of getting more individuals out of single occupancy vehicles and then using additional modes of mobility as they travel to and from their destinations. And so started there, but let's go into the recommendations and a little bit of background on what Envision My Ride is. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the initiative, we started Envision My Ride back in 2016, where we developed the initial planning component to the study rather. So with that, we learned that individuals wanted more frequent service. And so we identified a plan to bring more high frequency routes, meaning more routes that operate every 15 minutes or better to our network moving forward. The long-term vision is to have all of our routes at 30-minute or greater, or I'm sorry, 30-minute or less service, I should say, moving forward so that we can help reduce wait times. In addition to that, implementing more direct service, and then also shifting away from that hub and spoke model where we force-fed a lot of individuals into uptown Charlotte to make their connections. And instead looking at where we can build those crosstown connections to connect individuals from key hubs outside of uptown. And then also looking at how we can better connect individuals, not only between bus and bus, but also bus and rail as well. And so we began the second component of Envision My Ride last year with the bus priority study, and that's focused more so on capital improvements. So looking at how we can make improvements in three main areas. So one is from a speed and reliability standpoint. So making sure that we can implement technology where we can make sure our service is more reliable and on schedule as well. And then also looking at how we can continue to build those connections. So not only between transit, but other forms of mobility as well through a new concept known as mobility hubs. And then last but certainly not least, looking at how we can continue to improve our bus stops system-wide by offering accessibility improvements, and then also a greater level of amenities at the bus stop level as well. And so with the recommendations, we've identified them or framed them into three main categories. So we're looking at how we can improve time. And so that's with the new high frequency network that I mentioned. And so if you can see on the map here, all of those routes that are color coded in red represent the future high frequency network. And I'll have a slide that goes into a little bit more detail here in a couple of moments as well. And then looking at how we can continue to implement consistent schedules. So similar to what we currently have on our blue line, looking at how we can roll out frequency improvements, not only on the weekdays, but then also on weekends as well. And that's mainly important for individuals that don't work those traditional shifts. So making sure that they have the same level of access from a transit standpoint on the weekday as well as on the weekend. And then looking at how we can implement those priority bus treatments that I mentioned to help us improve speed and reliability. And then moving into enhancing experience with the bus stop and mobility hub improvements. And then last, looking at how we can continue to increase access through those new crosstown connections. And then also a new technology that we're rolling out known as microtransit. And so as you can see here on the map, you see those gray zones. And so we've identified several first last mile zones for how we can better connect individuals to those high frequency routes as well. And I'll go to that in a little bit more detail too. So starting with improving time, I mentioned that we're expanding the network of 15-minute or better service. And so all the routes that you see there on red represent that future high frequency network. So that includes corridors such as Beatties Ford Road, Central Avenue, Freedom Drive, Wilkinson Boulevard, Graham Street, Sugar Creek Road, West Boulevard, Providence Road, South Tryon, just to name a few of those corridors. And then as I mentioned, the goal is to have all of our service at 30 minutes or better moving forward so that no individual will have to wait more than 30 minutes for their transit ride to come. And then of course, last but not least, looking at how we can implement that consistent schedule, not only on weekdays, but then also on weekends as well. Another key thing that we've been looking at how we can roll out is technology known as priority bus treatments, And so looking at how we can take advantage of things like signal priority and then queue jumps as well. And so we're actually partnering with CDOT, the Charlotte Department of Transportation, I should say, to roll out signal priority at all of the intersections that they manage throughout the city. And so we're hoping to have that online by the end of this year. And so the way that that works, if you see the top graphic there, the buses, whenever they pull up to an intersection, they'll be able to communicate with the traffic signal. If they're running behind schedule, they can either advance or extend a green light so that they can get through the intersection and then continue to their destinations. In addition to that, we also identified a greater level of detail on 6 focus corridors, and I'll get to in the next slide. But one of the recommendations building upon signal priority is looking at how we can roll out queue jump locations at intersections as well. And so the example at the bottom shows you what a queue jump is. Essentially, it builds upon that signal priority by providing buses with a special signal. So when they pull up to the intersection, they'll get a green light where they can jump ahead of stalled traffic while everyone else has a red light and they're still waiting at the intersection. So I mentioned the focus corridors. So just because of the scope of the project, we were only able to identify 6 corridors to begin with. So we use a number of metrics to narrow down this list. And so these are 6 corridors where we have the greatest level of need from a bus delay standpoint, and then also looking at how we can continue to support some of those long-term visions for the area as well. And so we looked at other metrics, including current and projected population and employment density. We looked at equity goals as established in the Charlotte 2040 plan, and then other metrics as well to help us narrow down this list to 6 corridors. And so we identified Route 9 on Central Avenue, Route 7 Beatties Ford Road, Route 16 South Tryon, Route 27 Monroe Road, Route 34 Freedom Drive, and then also Route 2, which provides service between Freedom Drive and the Lynx Scaly Bark Station. And so this just provides us with a greater level of detail in terms of how we can roll out some of those additional priority treatments. The goal is to use recommendations for these corridors to develop a capital program that we can begin to roll out on additional corridors as the need arises. So specifically looking at corridors like Providence Road, West Boulevard, Graham Street, and so on, looking at how we can roll out some of the recommendations that we've identified on these corridors long term. Now moving to enhancing experience. And so I mentioned that we are in the process of looking at how we can roll out additional amenities throughout our networks at our bus stop levels. So one of the key things that we want to shift away from is looking at how we can roll out amenities or shelters at a greater level. So primarily in the past, we use ridership as a metric to justify rolling out a shelter. So typically if a stop had 25 or more boardings on average, we would place a shelter there. We realized that that doesn't take into account other factors that we should consider. And so we're developing a new methodology for how we roll out those amenities. And so instead of just looking at ridership, we're looking at other metrics, including wait time. We're looking at the type of population served, specifically for serving senior individuals or senior populations. But then also looking at the destination as well, if it's a library, a medical facility, grocery store, and so on. So assigning points so that we can greater roll out amenities on a larger scale. And this chart shows you a breakdown of the different types of bus stops that we're recommending for the bus priority study. It may be a little hard to see, but what we're doing at minimum for our standard bus stops is want to make sure that we're rolling out those accessibility improvements so that individuals can access our services where feasible. So making sure that we have sidewalk infrastructure in place and then also a concrete boarding area. With the standard stop, we have 3 different tiers. So type A, type B, and type C. Type A would have those minimum improvements that I mentioned from an accessibility standpoint, rather. Type B adds a bench to that and additional amenities, including the semi-seats. And then type C adds a shelter to that as well. What you see on the right-hand side of the chart represents our mobility hubs. And those are defined as hubs where we have greater connectivity, not only between transit, but other forms of mobility as well. So bike connections, scooter connections, some of those important first, last mile connections, and so on. And so what we've done is we've identified several locations throughout the region where we can roll out those greater level of amenities through a mobility hub. And to give you an example of what the different hub types are, starting with the level 1 mobility hub. So picture this if you're familiar with our Wilkinson Sprinter line that runs on Wilkinson Boulevard to the airport, where we have the enhanced amenities, including the shelter. Picture something similar to that with the level 1 mobility hub. Of course, we'll build upon that slightly by offering additional things such as scooter storage, additional signing and technology as well. So look at that for locations where we have maybe major activity generators, major transfer centers, maybe it's at a public library, at a park, some of those key grocery store locations, key hotspots like that where we roll out the level 1 amenities for the mobility hub. In addition to that, we have our level 2 mobility hubs, and how these are defined are essentially where we have 2 intersecting bus routes. And so this is designed to provide that on-street transfer experience for individuals. So we have a greater level of amenities, such as what we saw with level 1, including the shelter products, additional wayfinding signage, bike and scooter storage areas, and then also enhancements to crosswalk improvements as well, so that we can help facilitate those transfers and allow individuals to safely navigate across the intersection as they transfer between different bus routes. The largest tier is the level 3 mobility hub. And so this is similar to what we have at our current park and ride locations and mini transit centers. If you're familiar with the Rosa Parks Transit Center on Beatties Ford Road, or the Eastland Transit Center over at the former Eastland Mall site, or some of our light rail stations as well. Essentially, that's what a level 3 mobility hub is. And so this is designed to have dedicated space for our vehicles to operate and also layover, so that we can help with those transfer experiences for individuals as well. And then also to provide those key connections so that individuals can easily transfer from other modes. So whether it's a park and ride, if they're jumping on from a commuter standpoint to hop on our services, if they're navigating via bike connections or walking, or if they're having the connections through those first last mile solutions known as microtransit, which I'll get to here in a second as well. We want to make sure that we're able to facilitate those transfers and provide a comfortable experience for individuals as they transfer between those different modes and our services as well. I mentioned increasing access as well. And so we're rolling out a number of new connections throughout the network. One of the main connections includes a new connection between the JW Clay Station and then the University area, and then also North Lake Mall via WT Harris. Another location between Independence along Albemarle Road and the 485 Novant Health Hospital. A new connection along Sugar Creek Road between the Derrida community and then also the Sugar Creek Station. New connections between Waverly and Ballantyne, and then also Ballantyne to the Lynx Sharon Road West Station, which will take advantage of those future 485 toll lanes that they're currently working to install. And then also a new connection to some of those future developments, mainly the River District development, that'll happen along the West Boulevard corridor as well. In addition to that, I mentioned those new crosstown improvements. So where we can, shifting away from that hub and spoke model where we have a lot of our routes come into uptown, and instead creating more of those crosstown connections from a hub to hub standpoint. And so that includes the new connections from Rosa Parks Transit Center over to the JW Clay Station, that new Sugar Creek route that I mentioned along Sugar Creek Road, and so on, just to name a few. In addition to that, we're rolling out a new concept known as microtransit or on-demand service. And so essentially think of that as a hybrid between Lyft and Uber and transit. So typically we would operate a smaller vehicle. If any of you are familiar with our paratransit services, where we use those smaller vehicles, or maybe some of the airport shuttles as another example, think of something like that. So essentially how it will work is individuals will be able to request, similar to Lyft and Uber, through the CATS app or calling in through our call center to be picked up within a specific zone or boundary. Typically, it's roughly about 2 square miles. That could vary just depending on the amount of area that we're trying to cover or the specific use case. But it's designed to provide that feeder connection to individuals, or for individuals rather, so they can connect to those frequent transit routes, and then also connect to key destinations within the specific zones as well. And so we have different use cases for how we can use microtransit. One of the most important pieces is providing those key neighborhood connections. So especially where we have areas where maybe the sidewalk connectivity or the roadway connectivity isn't as great from a pedestrian standpoint, looking at how we can connect individuals to those frequent transit routes. The Hidden Valley community is a key example of that, where we have a lot of demand for transit services, but looking at how we can provide more flexible service so that we can connect individuals to the Blue Line or other key destinations along Sugar Creek and Tryon. We can also extend our services to provide those key first last mile connections. So where we have end of the line services, but then there's still a service gap where we can't provide service from a fixed route standpoint, looking at how we can supplement that with microtransit connections so that we can help bridge that gap and connect individuals to some of our services. And then also looking at how we can replace potential routes. So specifically some of the lower performing routes from a frequency standpoint, so where we have 60-minute service, looking at how we can provide a more flexible option for riders that'll be more convenient as they connect to and from their destinations. And so we did a suitability analysis to determine specific zones for microtransit. And the key thing that we want to look at is where do we have a higher level of transit need, but maybe a lower productivity analysis or productivity situation, I should say. So maybe the land use development or land use patterns doesn't support traditional fixed route service, but there's still a need from a transit standpoint to connect individuals to some of those key destinations. And so we wanted to look at areas where we don't have current suitability or high suitability from a transit standpoint to provide traditional fixed route service, but there's still a demand for where we need to provide connections for individuals. And so with that, we've identified a number of zones. And so on this map here, those areas that are shaded in the darker gray represent the initial microtransit zones that we've identified. These include areas including the northern towns, includes the town of Mint Hill and Matthews, the Ballantyne area, the Still Creek area, the area around the airport, and then also additional areas around UNCC Charlotte, just to name a few as well. And so we initially identified these zones. The next step is to develop an operational strategy for how we begin to implement this, what type of technology we use for this, how we can integrate it with our services, if we operate it in-house or if we contract out with a third party, answering some of those unknown questions. And so once we begin that process, we'll be going back out to the public to further refine these zones and get additional input too, as far as how we can continue to provide those key connections. Another thing that we'll begin to look at, which isn't shown here on the map, is how we can continue to provide those first last mile connections to the Lynx Blue Line as well, specifically around the Camp North End area and other key destinations too. And so, there we go. So just to go into a little bit about our outreach over the past few years. So we did reach out to about over 5,500 individuals in total. And so through the past year with the bus priority study, we reached out to the public both virtually, we did in-person pop-up events, and other events as well, where we engaged the public to learn more about some of the key priorities as it relates to the bus network and how we can continue to improve service as well. And so some of the key things that we heard from riders is just how important it is for them to connect to their destinations and what it would mean for them to have more frequent service and more reliable service. So we heard from several individuals that it will help them connect to their destinations on time. The gentleman in the middle had a strong point of he would be able to connect to his job and maybe enjoy a cup of coffee before he clocks in. So some of the things that we may take for granted. So being able to connect individuals quickly to their destination so that they can enjoy some of those activities that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis. And so before I get into the recommendations, so from the public input, we saw a number of key themes to help us frame the overall recommendations for the initiative. And so we saw or heard from individuals that fare collection is often a problem where we see that slows down the boarding process. So some of the key recommendations that have developed from that is including more off-board fare collection locations. So if you ride our Lynx Blue Line, you're familiar with the ability to purchase your ticket before you board the train. So looking at how we can roll that out specifically at some of those larger mobility hub locations. And then also continue to make our payments on the app as convenient as possible. We also heard from individuals that buses often get delayed, especially at the intersection. So some of those priority treatment recommendations that I mentioned, including TSP or signal priority, those queue jump locations, and then also continue to explore where feasible dedicated bus only lanes as well. We often heard that bus stops feel uncomfortable and safe from our outreach. So of course, with those mobility hub improvements, and then also the system-wide bus stop improvements and upgrades that we're working to implement as well, including installing new technology for lighting. We've been looking at different vendors for the potential for solar lighting at some of our bus stops so that we can make it feel more safe for passengers as they board and deboard. We often heard that buses are delayed and they have to wait a long time. So looking at how we can roll out new technology with real-time information, specifically through our app, but then also having information at some of those mobility hubs that have real-time live tracking on the signage for individuals that don't have access to a smartphone. And then also we heard that bus stops are often inaccessible, so they're too far to walk to. So looking at how we can supplement that through microtransit and that first last mile connectivity. And so just to sum up the recommendations overall, and so we're working to build a better bus network essentially. And so the board that I mentioned, the MTC, recently adopted that system map that you saw at the beginning that has all the recommendations laid out on it, including the future mobility hub locations, the future high frequency network, and then also those first last mile microtransit zones as well. In addition to that, beginning the work of implementing the focus corridor improvements that we've identified. So on routes 9, 7, and so on, looking at how we can begin to roll out those capital level improvements. Of course, moving towards the bus stop improvements. So adopting that new typology and scoring system that I mentioned, where we can roll out a greater level of amenities moving forward. And then also continue to work so that we can make sure that our bus stops are accessible for passengers. So rolling out improvements rather, so that we can improve ADA and the other concerns as well. And then also implementing more microtransit service. So those identified zones, we're asking that we adopt a microtransit zone strategy so that we can begin to work for the future study. And just to speak on that a bit too, we did recently receive good news that we received funding from the FTA to take that microtransit strategy to the next stage. So within the next couple of months, we should have more information on that. Of course, so we will keep you posted on how you can be involved, specifically on how you frame some of the recommendations for the zones, the pickup and drop off locations and so on. And then last but not least, looking at how we can build a capital program with all of these improvements so that we can begin to roll them out as a package, and then also set ourselves up for additional opportunities for funding, specifically for federal funding, I should say. So looking at how we can explore corridors for corridor-based BRT solutions or bus rapid transit solutions, and so on. And so just to sum it up, when we think of the main goal of this, it's looking at how we can continue to build that connected network. And of course, I mentioned as we continue to support some of the other initiatives, specifically around 10-minute neighborhoods, we want to make sure that transit is a part of that solution. So looking at how we can provide frequent transit service on those main corridors that'll work to connect to those key mobility hubs. So individuals can access them if they're connecting via bike, scooter, or if they're walking, so making sure that we have those enhancements in place as well. Building the connection through the microtransit or first last mile component so that we can help supplement that coverage gap and connect individuals to frequent service as well. And then also looking at for the individuals who drive or commute to some of our park and ride locations, looking at how we can have technology in place, such as electric charging stations for maybe some of the electric vehicles, and other infrastructure in place too, so that they can connect to individual transit lines and connect to their destinations as well. And so with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you all may have. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen, but if there's a specific slide you want me to go back to, let me know that.
I thank you so very much, Bruce. I think we have some hands raised here in the room, and I believe we have some online as well. I think this time I'm going to start. I think the last time that CATS was before us with an Envision My Ride update, I had sent a follow-up request regarding accessibility and technology. So Bank of America sponsors a leg of an app called Blind Square. Blind Square is a GPS application that assists those that are blind or partially sighted with navigating in particular cities. And again, Bank of America provides the data and helps support financially the Charlotte leg of this particular app. I wonder what type of similar technology might CATS already have in this update that you maybe didn't touch on that you can share with us, or are there any partnerships with those types of apps that may do something similar? Can you share some information to that regard?
I may have,
sorry. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I may have to come back to you on that. I'm not too familiar. I may have to consult with our marketing team to better answer that question for you.
Okay, thank you so very much. I'll send an email to you after the meeting. And we have a hand raised in the room from Commissioner Barbie and Russell, and then we'll get to Commissioner Gusman. Commissioner Barbie, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for that presentation. I was hoping to hear you have a specific call out around special transportation for older adults. And I wanted to see if you could speak to that specifically, especially older adults that fall into that lower to moderate AMI level that have a lot of challenges with bus transportation, access. Utilization probably isn't as high, but necessity is there. Can you speak to what the plan is for that?
Yeah, so anytime we expand any of our fixed route service, we do provide the STS service as well within a 3/4 mile of the route. So all of the routes that you saw in the presentation from a new connectivity standpoint would still be supplemented with STS services. And that stands for Special Transportation Services, but essentially it's our paratransit option. So for individuals that can't access traditional fixed route service, they have that option as well. So like I said, with all expansions that we have in plan, we would also expand that STS service. The other key component with that is that first last mile microtransit piece. So that's more of a flexible service as well. And so since we operate those smaller vehicles like the microtransit, we have more flexibility for where we pick up and drop off individuals. So especially if senior individuals aren't able to easily access a bus stop via walking, the microtransit can be a more flexible option. We're still pretty early in the stages for planning pickup and drop off points and how that process would work. But that's definitely a component that we'll continue to consider as we move forward with it.
Thank you so much. And just one follow-up question. As this plan is finalized and I, normal community member, have a question or a concern about the transit lines, what is the best way to go about expressing my concern or even advocate on behalf of my community that we think more transportation needs to be in our neighborhoods? I've heard from community members that they just don't know what to do. What would be your answer to that?
So a good start is contacting customer service. And so it's 704-336-7433 or RIDE. And so every time you contact customer service, they send over, whether it's feedback, if it's a complaint, or advice for how we can improve service, they send that over to the appropriate department. And so a lot of times where it's service requests, or if anything as small as I need a new bus stop, or maybe we need a shelter here, customer service will log that and then they'll send that over to our team and then we'll vet through that. And so a lot of times when we notice common trends through the customer service requests, we'll respond accordingly. A recent example of that is, I think it's the Hope Food Pantry Church. It's off of Proximity Village. It's in that area, but long story short, we recently received a lot of requests through customer service for that. And as a result, we extended a route up there so that we can provide service to connect individuals to that service that the church provides. So definitely if you reach out to 704-336-RIDE or 7433, that's the best way to make sure that your voice is heard, and we'll vet through that and follow up accordingly.
Bruce, thank you so much.
Commissioner Gusman.
Bruce, hey, Phil Gusman, committed bus rider and frequent denizen of the number 9. Very exciting. A lot of what the developments that you've outlined here. This is exactly, I think, where we need to be heading. I was recently in Denver and got to fully experience. I paid for more rides in the last 2 weeks in Denver than I did in Charlotte because of the number of times fare boxes have been broken. My 10 ride took too many swipes to try and get red or whatever. So that's a problem, and it's good to hear that you guys are working on that fix. The people who can pay need to pay, obviously. Outside of that, I'm excited by a lot of what you offered. One thing I did have a question on, and I'll probably reach out to you later on some of the other stuff, but one question I had is, some of your graphics were representing bus lanes. Where are we at on that as a recommendation that might be in this plan that I didn't see enumerated, but you referenced in some of your slides.
Yeah, so of course we did the pilots initially, 4th Street back in 2019, and then also Central Avenue, which concluded last year. So based on what we've reviewed with that data and then also peer city examples, we're not recommending bus-only lanes at the moment just because of thresholds. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's certain volume of buses. I believe it's 24 buses per hour. That's the recommended threshold for bus-only lanes. And currently we don't have corridors that meet that. That's not saying that we won't make the investment so that we can reach that threshold, or maybe we adjust that threshold depending on specific corridors. That's still something that's under consideration. We haven't closed the door completely on bus-only lanes. It's still a viable solution for how we improve service. We're just looking at it from a corridor standpoint, and then also looking at where it's feasible. Most likely in a lot of scenarios, we'll have to build additional right-of-way rather than converting existing lanes. So that presents another challenge in itself. But long story short, it is something that we're still exploring.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'll reach out on other questions.
Perfect. Yeah, and feel free to, if anyone else too, I think my contact information should be available, but feel free to send me an email and I can follow up with you.
Thank you, Bruce. I just, again, thank you for bringing this presentation to us. It is exciting to see, this was primarily, to me at least, a technological update, right? And there's some investment being made in ensuring that rides are more consistent, more reliable. It's exciting to see. I was particularly excited when I saw the amenity rollout strategy, the criteria be expanded for those. So thank you again. I believe there are a few of us that'll have a follow-up question. I'll be one of them. And another question that I would probably go ahead and prepare you for in advance is some of the data, particularly around the micro transit zones. The data that you use to evaluate where those zones lie, how often does that get evaluated? Which, you know, with Charlotte being such a rapidly growing, rapidly developing city, how often will that data be evaluated for changes? Would also be a follow-up question. So nothing you have to answer right now, just be prepared for the follow-up. And again, I thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I think I skipped Commissioner Russell. My apologies, please.
Microphone.
I said, I'd like to thank Mr. Jones for the presentation. Very excited to see that Charlotte is finally taking public transit serious and is looking to develop some new ways to move people and connect people. I do have a bunch of questions around microtransit and kind of some of the other connection points that you made. So I will be sending those over to you that way.
Perfect.
Okay, again, thank you, Team Katz, Bruce, for bringing that information to us.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'd like to draw attention to everyone's to the agenda, item number 4, where we have our future work session agenda topics and meeting dates. Right behind Kat's presentation this month, next month, we'll have the strategic mobility plan. I believe Ed McKinney and team will be before us. And much of what Bruce shared with us will be very related to what Ed will speak about. And again, all of this being connected to our comprehensive plan goals. So it's exciting to see some of these dots be connected. We'll get another UDO update prior to the public hearing for council. That actually happens the same day of our meeting. So just a note on that. And July 19th, I just want to make sure July 19th will be the planning committee's date to recommend adoption or not of the United Development Ordinance to council. June 27th, what's that date? Is which date?
Adoption. No,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I had asked Allison, we're having a bunch of side conversations here. So the strategic mobility plan, it goes before council on June 27th. And please, if you are familiar with how to find council agendas, I would encourage you to keep your eyes open for that particular agenda. It's packed with some good stuff, and the strategic mobility plan is one of those items. I would now like to, I would say recognize, I'll keep it at recognize Commissioners Ham, McMillan, and Spencer. I'll more so identify that this meeting would ordinarily be the last meeting for these three commissioners. I had hoped to have finalized a request that I started making back in February, I believe, March, a request to extend their service for an additional 30 or 60 days. I was hoping to have that answer prior to today. The reason that is because these three commissioners, as you all are aware, once you've served 6 years on the planning commission, you can't serve any more time consecutively. Now you can leave and come back, hint, hint. But in terms of consecutive service, 6 years is the max, and these three commissioners are at the end of their max consecutive service term. And I just wanted to highlight that, to thank them in advance of any kind of extension that I want to say it's done, but I have poked and prodded you all for the past couple of months and make sure that you were prepared for my request. The reason I made that request is that the UDO adoption, once we knew that it would be pushed to July, it was pushed out of June. Originally, the UDO recommendation from Planning Committee fell in June, which would not be an issue for us. But as we have experienced in the past, where council and or county commission sometimes has delays in their appointments after our fiscal year roll-offs. And in preparation for any potential delay, I had asked our interim planning director to help me accommodate this request to have extension of service for these three commissioners. And that was after I made sure that they were okay with that potential extension. So I thank you all for being open to the request, being willing and able to serve additional time as we transition our zoning committee members and planning committee members, as we typically do at the end of a fiscal year, which is June 30th. So I just wanted to inform the body that their terms have expired. However, we may get to enjoy them for another, enjoy and torture for another 30 or 60 days. And I will have a decision and time certain very quickly. And Ms. Craig is going to help us usher that, hopefully through the appropriate bodies. So if there is anyone here who won't be joining us in June, for our July meeting, for some reason you have already something previously scheduled, you may want to say your thank yous to these commissioners now. These three commissioners all bring something very special to the Planning Commission. We all bring different perspectives. These three in particular, I tell you, have been available to me as a personal privilege in matters that are completely unrelated to the commission. I can't count on 2 hands how many times I've had to reach out to Commissioner Ham, just as particularly during the pandemic, about his wheelhouse is the advancement, skills training, things of that nature, and just how to get resources out to people during these times of those challenging times when nobody knew what to do. I was kind of blowing his phone up, but just getting his feedback. And again, that's his wheelhouse, and to lean on that specialty. Thank you so much for all that you do inside and outside of this circle. And I wanted to say that publicly. Commissioner Spencer, I don't think there is one topic that you're not knowledgeable about I think that every meeting in which you have a speaking voice, I have learned something from you. And I wanted to say loudly and proudly, thank you for ushering me into leadership of this body. And thank you for your service to this body inside and outside of the circle. Commissioner McMillan, although we don't touch, our circles outside don't touch directly, there are times indirectly that we've touched circles many a times, and your input is always valued around this dais. And I wanted to thank you as well, Commissioner McMillan. Does she have her camera on? Commissioner McMillan had to fall off. I'm so sorry. But again, thank you to Commissioner McMillan, Commissioner Ham, and Commissioner Spencer. And if there's anyone that is willing to speak to that regard, you have the floor now. And again, we may, I'm pretty sure we will have them for another 30-60. That decision and time certain is yet to be determined, but I just wanted to offer that in case there was one or two of us who were not going to be able to be present during the next opportunity. So I wanted to say that loudly and proudly. Again, thank you three.
Madam Chair, I'd love to say just one thing. I'm extremely proud of the service that these three have given us. I've got Commissioner Ham in the room, but I'm not saying goodbye because I really think you're going to have to stick with us for the next 60 days. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll send individual goodbyes. But specifically, I do want to say for Commissioner Spencer, who's been a profound leader for all of us. You've taught us so much. I don't think I would have come to commission without you, and I don't want to get all teary-eyed and stuff. So I'll say it another few words privately, but thank you for all that you all have done.
Anybody else want to speak to the wealth of knowledge, greatness, willingness, and just all that they bring to the body? I just can't speak highly enough of Commissioners Ham, Spencer, particularly Commissioner McMillan has also made major contributions to the body. And again, I wanted to say a public thank you. And if there are any others on the line, that would, now is the time before I give the two that are remaining with us the floor. Okay, Commissioner Ham, any words?
I'll be very brief. I am proud. Well, you and I have a special bond because I had a breakdown during our retreat a number of years ago when my father passed, and so you kind of helped me get through that. But I'm almost certain I'm probably the only commissioner here who had to be removed from the Planning Commission, and I had a campaign to get put back on because I missed some meetings with dealing with my father's death. But I just appreciate everyone and being supportive, and I've learned a lot, and I hope I contributed a lot. So just will always be available for service.
Oh, don't speak that loud. Thank you so much, Commissioner Ham. Commissioner Spencer, please.
Well, first, I'd like to thank the member of the Planning Commission who texted me good riddance. I agree. I have served on the commission. I was first appointed in 2015, so I'm actually, with these couple extra months, I'm going to end up with much closer to 7 years than 6. It's been an amazing experience. It has been really humbling on multiple times. Obviously, there were a couple votes, and I was elected to a couple things here. And it's always really humbling when you have the confidence of your peers, your coworkers, your teammates. So that, along with Aaron's comments and your comments, Kiva, are really special. I do just want to thank everybody for working, especially over the past 3 years than this body has ever worked. This commission has never been a cakewalk, but we got the Planning Commission at a time when rezonings approached 200 a year, when we completely rewrote planning and zoning for the entire city of Charlotte and the county. It has been a gargantuan task, and it has been made better by every single person around the dais, every person on Zoom today, those who left the Planning Commission before us. We truly did have a role and a task that was so much bigger than the folks who came before us. And so thank you all for putting your all into putting so much effort into making sure that we, truly brought the voice of, ourselves, our communities, our neighborhoods, our people and into this. And then finally, there's a lot of things I'm proud of over the past couple of years. But I am proud that leaving the Planning Commission, I'm leaving the most diverse representative Planning Commission that we've ever had. And that has not always been the case. And when I say diverse, I don't just mean age, race, or gender, but also, when I joined Planning Commission, I think over 2/3 of the commission touched development in some way. And now we have a greater diversity of perspectives, jobs, careers, life experience. And that I think is incredibly important because, we can't plan the future of our city for the next couple decades with, only one career or one segment of the economy's perspective. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I'll never forget the past 7 years.
And let us not forget that thanks much to Commissioner Spencer. It's been a long campaign, but thanks much to Commissioner Spencer for the gift that you all received via email over their weekend. It is not, when the idea first came, and it was like, of course. So if you watch, I don't know if you guys pay attention, but if you go on the city or the county's website and you look up advisory boards, most advisory boards are required to commit to 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours max. There is no other board that approaches the commitment that is required of the Planning Commission. And I believe that requirement online is 24 hours, which over the past 3 years, I can tell you that Sam has contributed much more than that. I have contributed much more of that. Many of you have, particularly as you go on to the zoning committee. So the work that we do is very important, and that should not and cannot be minimized. The fact that council saw value in that and that Commissioner Spencer pushed forward that feedback. Thank you, Commissioner Spencer, because that should be recognized. We do some of the most important work that touches every single resident here in this county. I don't think there are many boards that can say that. Many boards focus on a particular age group or a particular economic class, or this is the one body, one of the very few that touches every single resident from newborn up to in the grave. And it shouldn't be minimized. So thank you, Commissioner Spencer, for bringing that to fruition. And if there is nothing else for the good of the order, it is now 2:10. And shall we consider it adjourned?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Commissioner Spencer.
Second.
Enjoy the